With the help of Hashem, we are learning Taanis Davav, as we began in the Mishnah and Daf Hey, speaking about until when are we to request for the rain. So we quoted the Mishnah, quoted the pasuk, and we quote this pasuk in the Shema and V'hayim Shemaya, that really there are rains that are called Yoira, the rains of Yoira. There are rains that are called Malkoish. We're going to see that in the context, let's say, of Shema, they are very beneficial rains. We're going to learn details now that the Yoira rains has 3 steps. There are 3 rains of Yoira. The first ones, the middle ones, and the latter ones. All of that will help us understand, as we'll learn a little bit later, that if the Yoira rains did not fall, then in the beginning, the Yechidim, special people, opted into a series of fast days that we'll call Bahab, that we'll learn a lot about later. But they only began, even the Yechidim that would begin fasting, the Bahab, was only after none of the Yoira rains fell. So we're going to learn about the Yoira rains. We're going to learn about a little bit about Malkoish rains. We're going to actually explain the word. Why are the earlier rains called Yoira? Why are the later rains called Malkoish? We're going to learn why was it relevant to know the 3 dates of the Yoira rains. The first date is to know when to begin asking for rain. The last date of the Yoira rains is to know for the Yechidim that if even then yet, and this date it didn't rain, let's begin fasting. We'll see many reasons why Chazal needed to tell us when the middle of the Yoira rains are meant to fall. And we're going to learn about the negative. Is what we say in the V'hayim Shemaya, that God forbid that there could be a possibility that Hashem is going to withhold the rain. So we're going to learn about rains that once that amount of rain fell, we know that we are not experiencing any more Deva'atzar. Interesting. So what's the minimum amount of rain? We're going to learn about the bracha that we are to make over rain. Really, if you remember from the end of brachas, Haroya, right, the last chapter on Daf Nun Daled, and then the Gemara on Daf Nun Tes, we learned about the sugya rain a little bit. One of the brachas that we learned there that you make over rain is Hatoivu Meitiv. And Taanis Davav, the Gemara asks it in brachas. We're going to learn a beautiful bracha that you make over rain that's not in the generic Hatoivu Meitiv bracha, and we're going to quote a little bit of what the Gemara resolves. When do you make Hatoivu Meitiv, and when do you make this specific bracha over the rains? We have in the later Poskim that nowadays, since we are living in a world that even if God forbid it doesn't rain in one location, since generally it rains in another location, and as we are going towards Mashiach, the transportation that we have today never existed. So therefore, there's a lot less anguish when there's a drought. Not, God forbid, a drought is still a problem and we should daven for it, but the level of anguish, if it doesn't rain, is nothing near as it used to be. In such locations, if you don't have that much tzad, then you don't make a bracha. I'm saying that's why most people are not familiar with the brachas over rain. When people lived in a time that if it doesn't rain in this region, God forbid, we're going to starve. Then when it rained, you made a bracha over the rain and a lot more. Chevra, let's start on the Vav Amid Aleph. 4 lines from the top of the Amid by the 2 dots. So Tana Rabbanan. The Braisa is trying to explain why is it that we use the word Yoire, Yud Vav Reishei, or we learned in the Mishnah in the last daf, Moire. It's same root. That's the name of the first series of rains. Why is it called Yoire? Amazing. And the Braisa gives various insights. Number 1, Shemoire es habriyos. Moire means it's an instructor. It's instructing. How is it? What exactly is it instructing to the people? Lahatiach gagoiseyam. When the first rain of the first series of rains fall, now we better plaster our roofs. Right? It falls a little bit in the beginning because if we're not going to fix our roofs, then it's going to leak in the whole winter. Also, and ulahachnas perisayim, if people still had produce out there in the fields, we just learned a few daf ago, halan, haluhu, b'nei bavel, certain people would leave their produce out later. The first rain is being moed, it's teaching you, instructing, chavra, the rain season is starting, you put things out there to dry, you're going to leave it out there, not only will it get red, it's going to get ruined. Overlast is called tzarechayim. Every location had different preparations that they needed to make for winter. One big preparation is preparing fuel for heat. All of these things is that the modern person, the city people, were not that aware of how much is needed to prepare for the winter. So that's why they called it yoira. It's like this is a tachlis dik reminder. The winter season is here, the wet season is here. And nach davar acher. That why is it called yoida? Not miloshin teacher, but from the root of MERCAVA. MERCAVA means it saturates. Because on the other hand, especially in the Middle East by Eretz Yisrael, it didn't rain over summer. So at the end of the summer season, that's when the earth, the land is very dry. So that rain is shemerava sa'aretz, it saturates the land. And ultimately, ideally, umashka atohim, it waters it all the way until the depth. We're going to appreciate this line in the Braisa more in Amud Beis, because if the rain is very weak, there isn't a minimum amount of water, we don't call that rain. The rain that the earth needs is not a little sprinkle. It's something that saturates. And the lashon here is ideally that it goes all the way down to the Tohaim. Okay. Or as we learned a few Masechtas ago, that after the 15 Shir HaMalasin of David HaMelech, right, the waters of the Tohaim are only 1,000 amas, so to say, under the earth. In other words, we want the good rain that saturates the world is called yoida, from the word saturation, merava. Shenemer, as it says, that tilomer ravei nachas, that by saturating it's tilomer ravei nachas, Gidudeho, that's how you put the comma, that by saturating its furrows, you bring pleasure to the Gidudeho. Gidudeho means to bands. It means to bands of people. And Berevivim, right? Revivim is one of the words that we use for rain, with showers, to moigigena simcha, right? We will soften the earth. In other words, the rains are not stam a little bit of water, but the rains, the blessed rains, soften the earth, and that brings about the bracha, tevarich. Davar acher, another understanding of the word yoida. Yoida, sheyoired benachas. Faket yoida is a description of how it falls. That it falls gently, ve'ena yoired beza'af. No, sometimes there are early rains, but they fall violently, they fall very hard, and they do damage. So when we use the word yoida, it's a description of the type of rain, not just the beginning of the season of rain, but it's yoida dika rains. Now, the Braisa says, how do you know? How do you know that yoida is dafka depicting a rain that's falling in a blessed way, which means it's falling gently and not harshly or not violently. So oy einoi elo yoided, that shemasher es haperos, maybe it falls, that the yoida is depicting the opposite, a rain that's falling so hard, so strong, that the fruits are on the trees and knocks it off the trees. Umashtiv es hazroim, and it washes away the seeds. Umashtiv es hazilonois. Fakert, that can be the meaning of yoida. Now, actually, it's not just, the word yoida is also used, lamashal, yoida kechetz, shooting like an arrow. The word yoida kechetz, in many cases, implies an arrow. An arrow is a destructive force. Now, there are certain things in nature that have to shoot like an arrow, but we're speaking about yoida can depict the opposite. So says the Braisa, no, that yoida must depict a good rain, a blessed rain, because since it says yoida and malkoish, they're juxtaposed, they are associated one with the other. Ma malkoish in the pasuk means levracha. Now, what does the word malkoish mean? The Gemara will say soon, but we're beginning with the premise that malkoish dafka means blessed, good, late rains. Af yoida malkoish is lebracha. But the Gemara says, how do you know that? Maybe the word malkosh, and now the Gemara is good. The Braisa is going to tell you how the word malkosh, that word could connote something negative. Mal means to cut down, to cut, and koish means hard or harmful. Fakert. Maybe malkosh means latter rains, the late season rains that are negative, that are destructive. Ella, the second white line, shemapelas abatim, rains that throw down houses, umeshaberes ha'ilonis, and it breaks the trees, and uma'ale es hasikoin, and it raises the locust, all connected to the word malkoish. There's a certain locust that is called malkoish or koish. So take, the word malkoish could lend itself to two opposite understandings, but now the Braisa is going in the other direction. Talmud lomi yoida. Ma yoida levracha, af malkosh levracha. Now we got a problem, right? You can't have the teacher is the student, the student is the teacher. We're going in circles over here. No, it's all the Braisa is saying is that one of these two words we might not know, but one of the two words, we know it means levracha. And Malkosh is not the one that we know it means a blessing, because Malkosh can also mean the opposite, but Yoira must mean blessed rains, and not from this verse, from another place. Yoira go from Inolan, because it says that B'nei Tzion Gilu, that you sons of Tzion, you be glad. The Simcho, and you should rejoice, B'Hashem Elokeichem, and Hashem our might. And why do we rejoice? Because kinasan lochem es hamoira litzedakah. Because when the moira rains falls, Hashem makes sure that it falls in a tzedakah way, in a positive way. Moira yoida is the same thing. And now the pasuk continues that the yoida lochem geshem moira umalkosh barishin. Now this is the pasuk that we learned in the Mishnah, which came to fruition in the times of Yoel, that even the moira rains fell barishin. Point is that since that pasuk is about blessed rains, that is the source that Yoida is Livracha. So when we read in the scripture Yoida Malkosh, we compare the Malkosh to the Yoida. Now, how does the word Malkosh mean a blessing? Because we spoke out how Mal means to cut down, Kosh means harmful. We're going to have that soon. So Tanach Rabbanan. Now let's go into the times of Yoida. Yoida, the ideal times of the early rain should be in the month of Mar Cheshvan. Umalkosh, when is the ideal time for the Malkosh rains? In the month of Nisan. Says the Braisa, asks the Braisa, Ato Omer Yoide b'Mar Cheshvan, Umalkosh b'Nisan Oy Einoy Ella Yoide should be b'Tishrei, because there are times that it rains even earlier. That's Taka the Mishnah in Sukkah. It's not the biggest bracha. And by the way, it can rain after Sukkah also. And we began the Masechta Nochvi Paskin, like Rabbi Yehuda, that says that we begin to mention, not to request, but we begin to mention the Geshem on the Musaf Shmini Atzeres. We're mentioning it because it's Shayach, because we're getting ready for the rain season, which sometimes happens, and sometimes the Malkosh comes very late, comes in Iyar. So it says the Gemara, no. Says the Braisa, no. Because it says Be'ito Yoiru Umalkush. The word Be'ito means in its proper time. Are there times that it begins even earlier? Yes. Are there times that the Malkush comes even later? Yes. But that's called already outside their Be'ito, outside their proper times. And so Be'ito Yoiru Umalkush, the time, the better time, the normal time of Yoida, Mar Cheshvan, the normal time for Malkush is a Nisan with many details as we'll learn, and many nafkaminas. Now, says the Gemara, Malkosh that we just established. So Yoida, the Braisa said, why is it called Yoida? Either because it's our instructor, or because it saturates, or because Yoida means it falls benachas. What's Malkosh? And Dafka, we want to find a positive type of Malkosh. Malkosh, what does it mean? Amar Rav Nihiloi, Baridi Amar Shmuel, Davar Shemol Kash Yoseyem Shal Yisrael. It's something that excises or that squeezes out, it takes away. It's mila. It takes away the hardness of the Jewish people. Amazing. What shot that Malkosh takes away something that's not positive? So Rashi, 5 lines, the Talmud of Rashi, 5 lines under the Gemara, says like this, that Kishe'eino yored, if this final rain doesn't fall, it's really not good. We need this final rain. And if it's lingering, if it's being withheld, everyone does tshuva. Kishe'eino yored, choizrin Yisrael b'tzeshuva, umesanin, and v'oisen tzedakos. No, it's the rain, it's amazing, that cuts away that which is not positive. Mal koish, it's mal de koish. How great is that? And even more than that, as long as the more we appreciate how much the rain is needed, it's not pshat that God has to withhold the rain, and then we daven the opposite. Especially before Mashiach, God gives us the malkosh, and we are appreciative of it, and what inspires us to do tshuva is not that something negative was taken away. Adarabah, we open our eyes, and every time there's a bracha, the bracha inspires us even more to do tshuva. So the malkosh, the good, makes us do tshuva. Not the God taking away the bad. The Vei Rabbi Shmuel Tanach, that another understanding of the word malkosh. That what is that? Davar shememale. That's the mal. Tfua bekasheha. As we learned also in the last notes, you have stalks. But the stalks is shaf. We want for the stalks to be filled with the ears, to be filled with grain. So the final rain is that which does it. When do the stalks get filled? When do the kernels grow? With the last rains. Another interpretation, b'masnisa tana, we learned in a brayso that davar sheyored, it's falling when the earth already has on it both the mal, meaning the melilois, the ears, and koish, the stalks. There's the earlier rains, nothing. The seeds are in the ground. The last rains is when everything is already out there. But it's like the makaba patish. It takes something skinny and it saturates it with water, and now the final product is a lot. It's more nutritious and it's larger. Both bekamos and be'echos. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in a brayso more details. Now we're going to focus dafka on the yoida rains. So we learned generally yoida is in cheshvan. Now we're going to learn that there were 3 yoida rains. The first yoida rain, the middle yoida rain, and the final yoida rain. Tana Rabbanan yoida b'mar cheshvan u'malkash b'nissen. And ha'gnachamol atoime yoida b'mar cheshvan oy einoi ella b'chodesh kislev. So as we had above, Talmud loimer be'itoi yoida u'malkash. Ma malkash be'itoi. And by the way, the be'itoi is when, like we just mentioned, let's go with the last brayso. It should fall when the ears and the stalks are already fully grown. Then the rain comes and it like finalizes it. Af yoida is in the beginning. And the right time, the correct time, the ideal time for yoida is in the month of Mar Cheshvan. Whether we're goydus or not, let's just read the parentheses. That kivan sheyatsa nissen, v'yardu geshamim einoi simen bracha, which actually means, according to this, that if the malkosh rains falls in iyar, it's not only that it's not be'itoi, it's not effective. But let's come back over here. Tanya idach, yoyde b'mar cheshvan malkosh b'nissen. That's the words of Rav Meir. Chachamim oimrim. Look at this. Another sheet. Yoyde is bekislev. Now, Yoida Bekislev doesn't mean that it should begin falling in Kislev, but man Chachamim Amar Rav Chisda Rab Yoisihi. When this Chachamim say Yoida Bekislev, that means that the last of the 3 rains of Yoida should ideally fall on Rosh Chodesh Kislev. That's the meaning that Yoida is Bekislev. And the Tanya. Ezohi Revia Rishoina. When should the first of the Yoida rains fall? So I guess Habechira, the Bechor, the oldest one or the earliest one, the youngest one, b'shloisha b'mar cheshvan. The second one, the middle one, beinanis b'shiva boy, on the 7th of Mar Cheshvan. And afela, the last one, is b'shiva aser boy, the day that, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the Mabel began to fall. These are the words of Rav Meir. So 3, 7, and 17. We're going to have to use these numbers in a moment. Rabbi Yehuda holds opinion number 2, that the first of the 3 yoida rains should fall on the 7th. And that fits to what we also learned into Dafim ago, that the Taket in Eretz Yisrael right now. When do they start asking for the saying Talo Matal Avracha on the 7th? Now really we learned to ask it for the 7th, even though the rain should have been asked it prior to that, but we want for people to come home. But here we're learning a shita that's taka the right date, that on the 7th of Mar Cheshvan, that's the first of the Yoda rains. So the first is on the 7th. The second of the Yoda rains should fall ideally on the 17th, B'Yud Zayin. And the third, according to the Tana, Rebbe Yehuda, should fall Be'esrem U'Shloisha on day 23 of Mar Cheshvan. And the final shita, Rabbi Yosi Omer, and this is the Chachamim of the prior Braisa, rains number 1, B'Yud Zayin. Rains number 2 should be on 23, Be'esrem U'Shloisha. And rains number 3 should fall on Rosh Chodesh Kislev. And that's the meaning that Yoida is Kislev, not that it begins on Kislev, that the ending of the Yoida rain should fall on Kislev, on the first day, on Rosh Chodesh Kislev. And v'chein hoye Rabbi Yosi Omer. And now we are at least mentioning inside, this whole sugya of rain is in the tractate of Taanis, because we are leading up to get a better appreciation of when the rain should fall and how important rain is to the world. And when there is, God forbid, a va'atzar, if God is withholding the rain, how that's to be understood as Hashem, who's personally involved in my life, is trying to tell me something. And amongst other things, it also should create within me a introspection, and that will also have in it a tshuva aspect and a taanis aspect. But when do we begin that? So even though that, as we'll learn later, there are different series of fast days, and we don't right away impose on everyone to have to fast, but after the final date of the Yoder rains do not fall, Yechidim, special people, opted to begin a series of fast days, which are called Behab, Beis, Hey Beis. So whenever Rosh Chodesh Kislev is, let's say Rosh Chodesh Kislev is Wednesday. So if it didn't even yet fall on Rosh Chodesh Kislev, then the following Monday, the Monday post Rosh Chodesh Kislev, closest to Rosh Chodesh Kislev, was fast day number 1. The following Thursday was fast day number 2, and the following Monday is fast day number 3. We're going to learn a lot about it, don't worry. But that's, you begin the series from when, says Rabbi Yossi, that Ein HaYechidim Asanam Achi Yagir Rosh Chodesh Kislev, because prior to Rosh Chodesh Kislev, according to Rabbi Yossi, you are still within the time of Yoda. Nothing happened if it didn't fall yet. And Amar Rab Chizda halacha ki Rabbi.
It doesn't really sound like Yair is the Kislev, because he says that it's the third one is supposed to be the first of Kislev, but the first two are certainly Cheshvan.
That's yes. I mean that's why. That's exactly what the Gemara is trying to clarify. You're making a good point. No, it's called Mar Cheshvan, not Mar Kislev. Mar means rain, even according to Rabbi Yossi, and we paskin like Rabbi Yossi. But on the other hand, the reason why the Taanis says Yoda is in Kislev, because people knew if the Yoda didn't fall, we're starting to fast. He didn't want people to start fasting too early. No, some things are meant to be understood as a tzara, and some things are not meant to be understood as a tzara. There was a couple that got married. And the Rebbe was, before Gimel Tammuz, and they were married for 6 months, and the wife was not pregnant, they wrote a letter to the Rebbe, like the end of the world, like, nah, they need a bracha. So the Rebbe wrote back, go ask a Rav. Ask a Rav. A Rav told him that until you're married for 2 years, you're not allowed to even worry about it. In other words, yes, when there is a tzara, when something is not the way it should be, we have to take the heart. You fash feish b'maisav. But what's called a tzara? So the Tana says, Yoid isn't Kislev. No, don't freak out. If it didn't rain in Cheshvan, as long as it's Rosh Chodesh, still Rosh Chodesh Kislev, you're good. That's the understanding. Okay, weiter. Now, this version is saying that Rab Chizda is paskening like Rabbi Yossi, but no, not everyone agrees to that. Ameimar masni lo had Rab Chizda b'halishna. Ameimar had another version of what Rab Chizda said, and it was in reference to another Mishnah, and ultimately it's another psak. So the Mishnah says that b'shloisha b'marcheshva in shoy alem esag shamim. See, on Daf Hey we learned ad masai, the end. But when do you begin asking for geshamim? We never learned a Mishnah yet about it. So here we're quoting a Mishnah we're going to have on Daf Yud. So the Tanakama holds you begin asking on the 3rd. Rabban Gamliel says you begin asking v'sein Talmud levracha on the 7th. On the 7th. Amar Rab Chizda halacha ki Rabban Gamliel. Now, how does he come to the 7th? What's the 7th? So the 7th is connected to the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, right? Who you begin according to everyone, you begin asking, not fasting. You begin asking on the first date of the Yoda. So if Rab Chizda said regarding that Mishnah, Halacha Kiram Gamliel, that means, and who says the first rain is on the 7th? Rabbi Yehuda. That means Rab Chizda said, not Halacha Ki Rabbi Yossi, Halacha Ki Rabbi Yehuda. Now, says the Gemara, 4 lines from the bottom, Kaman Azar Hadatanya, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Oimer. That Geshamim Sheyardu Shiva Yamim Zachar Zeh, what happens when we speak about the 3 rains during the Yoda period, it doesn't mean that it rains straight. It means it rains once, there's a break, it rains twice, and it rains thrice. Says the Tana, what happens if it rains for a week straight? And the first day and the last day, or as we'll see, it's connected to these 3 dates. But there's a 7-day connection between the first and the second, or between the second and the third. So they count for both. Or the Shniya and the Shlishis. So says the Brais. In other words, you want to make sure that everything is falling the way it should be falling. Bar and Adra, we want to thank God that things are mamish the way they should be. So if it rains for 7 days straight, it's a good thing. And if the first day and the last day are touching either the first and the second, or the second and the third, now you know that you already had the 2 reviyas of Yoida. Now hold on, 7? If you'll make the cheshbon, come on, this statement is only following Rabbi Yossi. Why is that, guys? What did Rabbi Yossi say? Rabbi Yossi says, that the first one is on the 17th and the second one is on the 23rd. Now, from 17 to 23, when you count those days, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, you have 7 days. Counting the first and the second. Let's go to the next. Then you say that from the 17th, from the 23rd to Rosh Chodesh Kislev, it also works. Because you have 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. Here, it does not include Rosh Chodesh Kislev, so it's ad v'lo yad b'chlal. But there's 7. It's not consistent, but both between the first and the second and the third, there is 7, including the days, including one of the days, but there are 7. According to all the other 2 Tanoim, Rashi makes out the cheshbon, it's not true. It's not 7, it's less than 7, it's more than 10. This statement means that the premise was like Rabbi Yossi, and therefore Amar Rab Chizda, here we have again the first version, indeed halachic Rabbi Yossi. Okay, now the following Gemara is not only in reference to Rabbi Yossi, but we had a 3-way machlokes when the 3 rains are to fall. Why do we need to know the middle rain? That's the question. So, why is there a machlokes tanoim? Why is it important to know when the first of the 3 is meant to fall? That's lishoil, because we begin asking v'sein talamat levracha on the first day, whenever that is. Whether you begin asking on the 3rd, or on the 7th, or on the 17th, that's the machlokes. Regarding the knowledge of when should the 3rd of the Yoder rains fall, why do you have to know that? Because if nothing fell and you already passed the final 3rd rain, that is where, like we said, the Yechidim take upon themselves to begin the series of Bahab fast days. But Shniya, the last line, Lamai nafkamina, when the second of these 3 are, or the middle one, Lamai, and the Gemara is going to give us many nafkaminas. Number 1, Amar Rab Zera Linadarim. 1 nafkamina concerning a law about vows. What will that be? The Tanan, Daf, Vav, Amid Beis. If a person uses these words, I am making a neder, not to benefit, that and that item is prohibited upon me. The meat in the world is prohibited upon me. Your possessions are asur alai. He makes a vow, but he says that the vow is only up until ad hageshamim, until the rains. Now note the plural, and not ad hageshem, ad hageshamim. Or he says that the vow should go into effect from when it rains. He uses a plural expression. In both cases, he's already evoking 2 rains. It doesn't mean when it actually rained twice. He meant for these 2 rains. So if I make a vow not to benefit from whatever, until, let's go to ad hageshamim, when does the vow go away? When the second or when the middle of the 3 rains fell. And I have to know when they're meant to fall. I have to know, is this the second rain? Because if it rained on the 3rd of Mar Cheshvan and on the 4th of Mar Cheshvan, that's not the second rain. It's still part of the first rain. Ad hageshamim means until the date where we count that rain to be already another one of the 3 rains. Rab Zvid Amar, I'll tell you another nafkamina concerning the laws of olives. What's olives? Let's give a quick intro when it comes to the many beautiful agricultural laws that are mostly connected to the Holy Land. So we know that if a person is melakate, when a person is gathering individual stalks, if you didn't bind sheaves, but you're gathering stalks, and 1 or 2 stalks fell, so the Torah says you got to leave it on the field for the poor. That's called leket. Shichacha, forgetfulness, means that if you properly bound the grains, the stalks, and then you cut them, and now you're going through your field to gather the sheaves, to gather the pekalach. And here also, if you forgot 1 or 2 sheaves, Hashem says leave it for the poor. There's a din called peah, that in every field, however you define the field, you have to leave an edge for the poor. Now, a theoretical question. There has to be a point, and this is connected to the sugya we have in Bava Metzia, the sugya of Yeush. There has to be a point where all of the poor people are so certain that there's nothing left, there's no leket left, there's no shikha left, there's no peah left, that they abandon the hope of finding anything. Whenever Yeush kicks in, if there happens, yes, to be something on the fields, it's no longer only for the poor. it has a din of hefker, and even a wealthy person, if he happens to happen upon it, he can take it. So that's this Mishnah. From when me'emasai kol adam, even wealthy people, a poor person always can take the leked shikha peya, but any person can take the leked or the shikha or the peya. So answers the Mishnah, Mishayelchu hanemushois. We'll see soon what nemushois means. But whenever the nemushois already went over that field, people say, the nemushois went, there's nothing. A poor person won't even go there. It's a waste of time. Which means everyone has a yiush or yeyush. Once there's yeyush, then anyone else who happens to find something can take it. Similarly, same question. Peret, just to know the meaning, peret is individual grapes that fall during the harvest. So on the tree you have clusters, and a grape, a prat. So those individual grapes also have to be left on the ground for the poor. Oileilois means underdeveloped clusters. So when you are going into your vineyard and you are collecting the clusters off the vines, some of them are not developed. So once you left them on the tree, you got to leave them for the poor. Same kasha. When can anyone take the peret or the oileilois? So mishayelchu aniyim bekedem v'yavoyu. No, if I know that the poor people went through this vineyard and they went through it again, there was a double sweep. Yeah, I know that sometimes the first people might have overlooked, but if they went and then they went again, all the aniyim, they don't even go there anymore. So they have you, so now it becomes hefker for all. Bizaysim, when can a person collect? Now zaysim, what shayach to zaysim, just to know, is the din of shikha, the din of peya. And here the Mishnah says, do you know when any person who happens to find an olive on a field is allowed to take it? Mi sheteret reviyah sheniya. In other words, the reviyah sheniya is a time that everyone, all of the aniyim were certain that by now there's nothing left. So now you have to know, what is the reviyah sheniya? What is the reviyah sheniya? To know when you are allowed to keep the olives if you happen to find them. So now that's this answer number 2. But now that we quoted this Mishnah, let's interpret the first leked shikho peya becomes hefker because the aniyim had yush mishayelchu hanemushois. So now my nemushois, what does that mean? Machlokes. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, it means savei the ozli atigra. Nemushois is a word that we use for older people that are walking on a cane. In other words, when the aniyim are walking through the field, the quicker you go, the less you notice. But if I am aware that the elder aniyim, the ones that are walking with a cane, which means they're walking slower, when they walk slower, they won't overlook anything. Once those aniyim pass, that's when the other aniyim have yush, and anyone else, if they happen to find, can take. Shlakish Oimar, that the meaning of nemushais is lekutei base lekutei. Those who glean after the gleaners. Rashi gives an example that when aniyim go to the field, if a ani, God forbid, is going by himself, mela. But imagine if there's a father and son team. That's his example of lekute basa lekute. If two people that are connected to each other, if they're going together, they go through the field in a way that they don't overlook anything. So when the other aniyim know, the lekute basa lekute went, then they give up hope of finding anything else. Answer number 3, but coming back to just to respond, why was it important for us to have a record of the 3-way machlokes tanoim when the middle of the yoder reigns is Lamai Nafkamina, Rav Papa Amar, another din, Kedei Lahalich B'Shvilei Horeshus, Gavaldik. When Yeshua conquered the land, he made many takanas. And by the way, this takana was broadened by Shlomo HaMelech for the entire world. That during the times of the year, that having the public walk through a field, not your backyard, but a field, if during that time it will not ruin anything that grows in the field, because of tircha de tzibura, people are given permission to walk through your property. And that's tikkun ha'olam. But obviously people can only walk through, make a shortcut through people's fields, only during the time of the year that they're trampling on the ground won't do any damage to anything that might be planted there. So until when are people allowed to walk through other people's fields? The Amar Mar, Mahalchin Kol Adam B'Shvili Yorashus. Until when? It's amazing. It's even after the first rain, even if the owners already planted grains in the ground and the first rain fell, me walking over it won't ruin it. But after the second rains, then something already begins to happen to these kernels, and if people are going to be walking on top of it, they're going to ruin it. So that permission, that reshus, is removed. Another answer. Rav Nachman ben Yitzchak Amar, why do we need to know about the Reviya Sheniya? Because of the law of Biur Peiroi Shvi is a din that we mentioned in the last Masechta a few times, that even though people are allowed to eat the produce of the seventh year, we're not allowed to, as a general statement with exceptions, we're not allowed to work the ground. But if a person only takes what they need for their immediate use from their field, from their neighboring field, everything belongs to everyone, they can eat it. But there is an expiration date. And the Torah says, I am only allowed to eat from the produce that grew on Shemitah if that same produce in my region, in Eretz Yisrael is divided into 3 Medinas. If I'm living in any one of these 3 Medinas, if that produce is still available out there in the field, l'chayes shebasad. So the question now will be, if I have stubble or straw that was used for fuel, that was used to feed animals in my home, if it grew on the Shemitah year, until when am I allowed to use it? What is the date that I have to presume that none of this is left out in the field? Now, we're learning about rains. Stubble and straw, I don't care if it's for fuel or for food, is only useful if it's dry. It tolerates a little bit of moisture. It is the second rain that will completely ruin the stubble and the straw that's out there in the fields. So therefore, you have to know when the Reviya Sheniya falls to know when you are obligated to dispose of, Machlokes Rishonim, exactly how you dispose it, the stubble and the straw that grew on the seventh year. Ditnan, Admasai Nehenen, and therefore V'sorfen B'teven U'Bakashol Shvis. So the Mishnah says, Acheteda Reviya Sheniya. And what's the magic about the second rains, like we mentioned? Because if there was stubble or straw or both out there in the fields, after the second rain, the animals that live out there, the beasts that live out there, won't be able to use it anymore. It becomes unusable. And my Tama, because it says in Parshas Bahar, that Ola behemtecha v'lachaya asher ba'artzecha, and Chazal teach us the fact that the Torah juxtaposes the domesticated animals and the non-domesticated animals, or the beasts that are out there in the field, to teach you whenever this product is still found out there in the fields for the beasts, only then ha'achel are you allowed to feed it, even if it's not human food. Then you are allowed to feed it lebehemtecha b'bayis, the last narrow line. But the moment that kala l'chayim in asada, the moment there is nothing of this type of produce, of product out there in the fields, then kalei lebehem techam in abayis. And after the second rain, like we mentioned, the stubble and the straw is completely mud. It's inedible. It's unusable. So I need to know when the Reviya Sheniya is, which means practical. That means that let's go that the first rains. What was Shitas Rabbi Yossi? Yud Zayin. Rabbi Yossi holds it's Yud Zayin and 23. If it rains on the 7th, on the 17th, and on the 18th, and on the 19th, I can still use on the 8th year the kash that I gathered from the 7th. 23rd, that's it. It's raining on the 23rd, that's already considered like the second rains. Now I have to dispose of it. Zok the Gemara. Okay, now that we gave all of the many nafkaminas for the middle of the 3 Yoder rains, why are we using the word Reviya for rains? That's the question on the first white line. Amar Rabbi Abo, my loshen Reviya? And he answers, Davar sheroiveya esakarka. The word roiveya means to copulate, or Reveya means to penetrate. In other words, that's we understand the rain as a yichud from the Shemaim and the Aretz. Kiderav Yehuda. The Amar Rav Yehuda, look at his words, that Mitra, the rain, is Baila Da'ara, it's the husband of the earth. Okay. Shenemar, and what's the hook? Shenemar, as it says, ki kasher yedit hageshem v'ashalek min hashamayim. Right, we say this on the fast days in the Haftarah, just like the snow, the rain and the snow falls from the heavens, and they don't return directly. V'shama lo yashuv. No, the ki'im, what do? They are meant for the earth. That it's hid v'sa'aretz. They are meant to saturate the earth in order ve'hoilida ve'etzmicha. It makes it bear vegetation. It makes it bud. It makes it sprout. In other words, there's a zayichud that brings forth a child. Oh, so first, that's the word of the Revia. Now, how much rain is considered the rain fell? A little sprinkle is garnished. Amar Ababohu, that Revia Rishaina, what's the minimum amount of rain that we can consider? The Revia fell, Kedei Shetated Bekarka Tefach, it has to penetrate the soil at least a Tefach. Less than that, as we're going to learn later when it comes to fastings, you didn't rain, that's not called a rain. Shniya, the second rains have to have what effect for you to say that this is considered the second series of rains, that the earth now is going to become so soft, so muddied, that now now you can form from the mud a cover for a barrel, which won't happen after the first rains, after a whole summer where the land is very dry. So the first rain, so to say, brings moisture into a tefach. That's what it should do. The second rain is a whole new level of mixing the earth and the water. Now you could already make covers with it. Amar Rab Chizda, that Geshamim, once the rain fell to the point, Sheyardu Kedei Lokuv Bahem Pichavius, that now you can make covers for barrels. Now is where we can be confident by saying that the curse, God forbid, that we read in the Shema, that there could be a possibility that Hashem will hold back the heavens. Va'atzar, there's no more va'atzar. Ein behem mishum va'atzar. Prior to that, even after the first rains, even after the rain penetrated the soil for a tefach, we're not out of the woods yet, so to say. What we're looking forward to is that it should be already this level that comes about during the second of the 3 Yoder rains. V'amar Rab Chizda, Kishabim sheyardu koidam va'atzar. He's giving you another siman. No, it's what rains are not that beneficial. So it's almost a play of words. Here, the word va'atzar is in reference to what time did the rains fall. Now we say the Shema at night, we say the Shema in the morning. Part of the Shema, whether it's Midai Raisa, the big Machlekes Rishainim, whether it's only Midrabanan, we say Shema, V'ahavta, V'hoya, V'yomer. In V'hoya is where we say V'atzar as Hashemayim, V'lo yeh matar. Now when do we say it? Which one is he referring to? It's not clear. Rains that fall prior to us reciting V'atzar, Ein Bahem Mishum V'atzar. Those rains are the rains that make sure that we're not in the curse of Va'atzar because the rain fell. What Va'atzar is he referring to? He's actually trying to say that the rains that are more beneficial are the rains that fall during the daytime. So rains that fall before we say the night Shema, that is what he meant. Those are the rains. It rained, no more Va'atzar. But if it rained at the end of night, before we said the va'atzar of the morning, those rains are not as beneficial. Let's read it inside. This statement of Rab Chizda is Elokoidem va'atzar de Urta. The atzar, which is the Shema, that we read at Urta, Oir la'arba asar, we learn Psachim at night, the rains that fall before, that's good. If it rained, no longer va'atzar. Avol koidam va'atzar de tzafra. But even if it rained before we recited the Shema, including the words va'atzar, of the morning, rains that fell before the morning Shema, which means rains that fell at night, it can even mean at the end of the night, just because it rained, yesh v'mishum va'atzar. You know, and we'll see, quantity has a lot to do. As we'll see in a moment, that if a lot of rain falls, the rain of the night is also great. But if only the minimum amount of rain fell, for us to say at least that amount fell, and we're no longer there's no va'atzar this year, that minimum amount is only if it fell during the day. That Hani Anoni the Tzafra, these morning clouds, he doesn't only mean the clouds. He means that when you wake up and there's a little bit cloudiness, which means it just it rained slightly before the morning, it garnished. We're not out of the woods. Lace, behu mamash. It doesn't have enough substance to saturate the ground. To say, this year there's no va'atzar. As it says, Dechsiv, Mo'eselocha Ephraim. What can I do for you, Ephraim? Mo'eselocha Yehuda. What can I do to you, Yehuda? You're not behaving properly. You claim that you're doing a couple of good deeds, but v'chazdechem, your goodness that you do is not sufficient. It's only like anan bakar. Anan literally means, anan means clouds. It means the rain, like a morning rain. It's shvach, it's not enough. From here you see that the rain that happens, morning means prior to the morning. The rains that happen at the end of the night is not as beneficial as the rains that fall during the day. How can you say that when we have an opposite statement? V'ha amri inshi, don't people have a... Yes. Yes. If I can see you, I'll know who I'm talking to.
My Gemara is not good at...
Go ahead.
Not good at...
So since by... Since by divine providence, Yaakov, we can't hear you, so maybe the girsa that you're quoting is not a girsa that we should hear. But could be, there's many girsas. Anyways, I'm reading my shas that my shver brought to me when I got married. I'm reading out of here. Good, weiter. 1 second. But people say the opposite. Now, by the way, that people say the opposite really doesn't bother us. But if it like we said, the reality is from the Torah. What we perceive to be reality is secondary, but if it's aligned, even the better. So people say that the miftach bave mitra, that if it rains when you open the gates, people open the gates in the morning. People sleep at night and they open the gates in the morning. So there's a statement that if you are going to open up your gates and the rain is already falling, those are the best rains. That means that there's going to be so much grain growing this season that people that make their livelihood, right, by selling grain, by transporting grain, they're going to have very little profit. That's the way it works. When there's a lot of supply, when there's a lot of grain, the prices fall down. So the statement is that if it's raining early in the morning, bar chamra, you grain deliverer, maybe the farmers made a higher percent. The deliverers only made a little bit of the revach. They only made a little percent of the profit. There's going to be so little profit. Don't even go to work. Much sakech. Fold up your bags and go to sleep. That's it. It's a bracha for the people, but for the people that are involved in making a livelihood, they're going to have a much less profit. In other words, if it rains in the morning, that brings an abundance in grain. And here we have a pasuk that's implying that Hashem is telling us that even though we do certain things, it's only like the morning rain. Kilo, it's not as good. Like Hashem. The kater be'eva. If it's very cloudy at night, which means it rains a lot at night, that's the best thing. Enoch, it's a special bracha, it didn't disturb the people. When we are speaking about a minimum amount of rain, if that minimum amount of rain fell at night, that's already completely not a benefit. It's not beneficial enough. Here if the clouds are thin, which means the rains were too light. And then those light rains going back is only, even if it penetrated the soil at tefach. That's the minimum. That's only good if it fell during the day. Perhaps al pi drush, when we're speaking about Isarusa de Lasata, Isarusa de La'elam, that the rain represents that we have to do something. So there's us doing during the day, there's us doing during the night. Us doing a little bit during the night. Night means tzaddis. That if we are reacting from tzaddis and doing a little bit of goodness, it's not as good as us doing for God when it's good for us. And then we should get into that habit. Not that we should begin doing tshuva when it's dark. No, do chesed dafka because it's light. That has greater significance. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda, teves lishata. I'm sorry, toiva lishata. It's good to the year if the teves are malta. If teves is a widow, mamish, like we learned before on here, that Rabbi Bo says that revia is like it's like an act of copulation. So if it's raining, then the earth is married. A drought would mean no rain, means that the earth is a widow. It's good for the year if it doesn't rain in Tevis. why is it good? What's the goodness? So there's two understandings. Ikada amrei, deloi bairi, tarbitse. The word bairi means empty. Tarbitse, marbitz, the places where people are marbitz toira. When it rains, noch in winter, and it's cold, people don't go to the base medrash. They only learn over Zoom. It's not good. When it's dry, in other words, if it doesn't rain in Tevis, then the base medrash is not empty. That's why it's good for the year. The ikada amri, not only beruchnias, but that also comes begashmias. The loy shakil shudfana. Shudfana are these very strong winds that are detrimental to the crops. You know when these big blasts of wind are detrimental to the crops only if the crops are wet. So these winds are common to happen in the heart of the winter. So that's the meaning that if it doesn't rain in winter, it's good. Because even if these winds will come about, it's not going to ruin the crops. In other words, it's good to have a dry teves. What are you talking about? It's good for the whole year if teves becomes menuvel, it becomes muddied. It's good if it rains. Make up your mind. Is it good if it rains on teves or not good? So like Hashem, if it already rained the way it should have rained with the yoyrem, those rains fell, so the earth has enough water. So then there's the benefit of you having a dry teves. People are going to be able to go learn more in the yeshiva. People are going to daven with the minyan more. It's also, even if there's going to be these wind blasts, it's not going to ruin the grain. But when the other statement of Rab Chizda is that it's good for the year, if it pours and teves and everything becomes muddy, that's the liyasa mitra meikara. Because even if it doesn't rain earlier on, you have an ishdakin falfalin, and that happens in the month of teves. If it rains only in one location in your Medina, and it didn't rain in the other place, even though it didn't rain by you, you can't say that God is withholding the rain, because even though you might not have produce here, there's going to be produce over there. And by the way, this is the reality that we're living in right now. And it says in Amos, this is a sad prediction from a Navi, from God, that 3 months prior to the reaping, I'm already going to withhold the rain, and it's only going to rain in one place, but it won't rain in the other place. On one place there's going to be rain, and another place there won't be rain. And Rav Yehuda Amarav interpreting that pasuk, that when Amos was predicting that it's going to not rain here, but it will rain there, he was actually saying that both places are going to undergo a klala. The lack of rain we get. But what Hashem was saying is that all of the rain that was supposed to be spread out in a larger area, all of it will fall in one location. So the one that doesn't have rain has a drought. The other location has too much rain. Everything will be flooded. The produce won't grow from that either. And they're both a klala. So how can we say that if it doesn't rain here, but it rains over there, it's good everywhere? Like Hashem. The asatuva. When is it a klala, even if it rains? That's only if it's excessive rains. That's the pasuk in Amos. And the statement that we had above is that even if it doesn't rain in one location, if in the other location it rains in moderation, the way it should rain, then even the place that doesn't have rain, so they might have to pay a few more dollars because of transportation, but that's not the va'atza. And again, all of the understanding, the interpretation of what's going on, do we have to start fasting? We have to know how to interpret reality, and that's what we're learning about. Amar Abashi, Daikanami, that it says in Amos, Timoter. Timoter means that it will be a place of rain. There's going to be a lot of rain in that location. The excess rain is what's also called a klal shmamino. Okay, so now we get it. That one of the ways Hashem speaks to us, the Baal Shem Tov says, everything that we hear and see is God communicating to us. But one way that's obvious is that if there's a lack of rain, or using the words of the pasuk, va'atzar, if there's a va'atzar, it's time for me to do tshuva. So therefore, when there's no va'atzar, I have to be very grateful. It's all from God, not to take things for granted and only turn to God when there's a lack of it. And the way, one of the things that a Yid does, he makes a bracha. Something good happens, you make a bracha. So asks the Gemara, how much rain needs to fall for you to make a bracha? And we don't say, that when the yoida falls, you make a bracha. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say that you make a bracha when it's already so muddy you can make a cover to the barrel. It's interesting. You know when you make the bracha? Listen to this expression. Again, using the rain as a metaphor of a couple. When the rain falls, but the earth is so thirsty that it absorbs all of the water. We don't make a bracha yet. You'll begin to make a bracha when the earth is so saturated that the water begins to create a puddle above the ground. And what type of puddle? That when a drop falls in, the water that's in the puddle splashes back up. It's interesting that over here we're flipping it. We're calling the rain that's already on the ground Hassan, and the new drop is called a kala. Interestingly, the opposite of above. So when the earth has puddles and it's falling and the rain is splashing back up, that's when you make the bracha. And now the question is, what is the nusach habracha? Answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. 4 lines from the bottom. That moidim anachnu l'cha Hashem Elokeinu al kol tipa v'tipa shoiradat olanu. That we are moida for every single drop. Rabbi Yechanan says that's the beginning, but it doesn't end with that. Messiah Ba, and there is now a abbreviated nishmas kol chai included part of the nusach, the formulation of the birchas hageshem. That after we say moedem anachnu l'cha Hashem Elokeinu v'chulei, we say now ilu finu malei shira kayam. That even if our mouths will be filled with song, like water fills the sea, u'lishenenu rina, and our tongue will be singing joyously, like what? Kahamoin galov, like the many waves in the sea. Nothing we can say will be sufficient to praise you until, and now we know nishmas. We're not going to quote the whole nishmas. Where does the bracha end? Until ad al ya'azvunu rachamecha Hashem Elokeinu. We ask of God that don't have your mercy forsake us. V'lo ya'azvunu, as it never had forsaken us until now, or forsaken us until now. No, it's as you have not forsaken us, we ask for the future. And how do we conclude the bracha? Baruch roiv ha'idois. Now, you should know the word roiv can have 2 opposite meanings. Roiv can mean, I'm thanking you many, many times. I thank you and I thank you and I thank you. Or roiv ha'idois can mean that for most of what happens to me, I'm thankful. And by the way, that's all connected. We'll quote soon the Rashi that reminds us the sugya in brachas daf nun daled, daf nun tes. The Mishnah says that when something happens to us that's good, ashachiyanu, hatoivometiv, when a person perceives something that in my perception is not good, we say adayin ha'emes. We make a bracha, but it's not the same nusach. Then the Gemara tells us that in the future, and certain tzaddikim, even in the present, they only made a hatoivometiv. Kishem shemavarchem al hatoiv, mamish the same thing. That's a whole different level. Notice, if you're not on that level that you perceive everything mamish being good, you acknowledge everything is from God. But either you react with one type of bracha, right, hatoiv u'meitiv, or God forbid with a dayin ha'emes. So that will be even the roiv ha'oidois. That was the havamina. Roiv ha'oidois means that for most of the things I give you thanks, but we're not happy with that. So the Gemara says roiv ha'oidois. V'loi kol ha'oidois. No, we don't accept that. When it's raining and you're thanking God, now is not the time. Even if we're not on the level of the future, even if a person makes a dayin ha'emes when things are bad, but when things are good, don't say, I'm thanking you for most of the things that you do for me. So Amar Rava, Ema Keil HaHoidois. That this is the God to whom we give all thanks. There's only one God, there's only one source, and everything is thanked to Him. Amar Papa Hilkach, since we have this Havamina of saying Roiv HaHoidois, then we said, no, say Kol HaHoidois, let's cover both. Neimirimu L'Tarvayu, say both. Keil ha'oidois, and say roiv ha'oidois. The advantage of saying roiv ha'oidois is because roiv ha'oidois can also mean I'm thanking you multiple times. That's beautiful. The problem with Roiv Ha'idois was that it might mean, I thank you for most things. It's not appropriate to say that when you're thanking God for something good. So the moment you say Keil Ha'idois, which makes it clear that all thanks is going to God, that interprets that the next statement of Roiv Ha'idois doesn't mean I'm thanking you for most of the things. That sheds light and teaches the words Roiv Ha'idois to mean I thank you a multitude. I thank you and I thank you again. Ich dank und ich dank noch einmal. Beautiful. And that's the bracha you make for the rain. And the kasha is, it says in the Mishnah, you say hatoivu meitiv. Hatoivu meitiv, not this big bracha with moedim, with nishmas. So the Gemara, so Rashi quotes on Daf Vav Amud Beis, the Gemara on Daf Muntes, Rashi quotes the beginning of the Gemara, and he says over here that if you hear that there's rain, if you heard there's rain, hatoivu meitiv. If you see the rain, then you make the lengthier bracha. The Gemara there actually continues. It also depends. If you own land, that will be the end. If I don't own land, hasei hatoivu meitiv. If you own land, the rain mamish is for you. Then you make this big bracha. Curious to know how to interpret now again that we paskin that since in most cases when there is a lack of rain, we don't feel the tsa'ar of the drought as much, so we don't make the bracha. But tak, if you live in a place, or if you are a person that you feel the severity of the din of the lack of rain, then you taka have to make this bracha. I would like to know what bracha do you make every time you make a sale? Same concept. Especially you're sitting in a retail store and no one walks in there, and then a person comes and they buy who knows what. There's got to be a bracha. Anyways, chavra, tomorrow, wow, we're going to begin about the greatness of rain, that the rain is Gadol Yom HaGshamim. Gadol Yom HaGshamim, the day of rain is like the day of the resurrection. We're going to have amazing Agadat on Daf Zayin to be continued.